5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Highway of the Hidden, where the forgotten roads of history still breathe, and the night hides more than shadows. Here, the restless dead whisper in the dark, cryptids stalk the tree line, and conspiracies linger just out of sight. Every mile takes us deeper into the unknown, and every story carries a chill. So buckle up and join me as we take a ride down the highway.
Merry Christmas, everyone, and Happy New Year's. Welcome back to Highway of the Hidden. I'm your host, Polar Bear. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to everyone this year who's came on the show, whether you were a guest or you liked, you comment, subscribed. I want to say thank you to you for real. And I want to say thank you to the people whose shows I went on. Thank you for letting me be a part of that and helping my show grow. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's episode. Christmas is supposed to be comforting. That's the version we're sold now. Soft lights glowing behind glass, warm houses sealed against the cold, music designed to soothe instead of warn, stories that promise no matter what you've done, no matter who you are, everything will be forgiven by morning. But that version of Christmas is modern. Historically, Christmas sits in the most dangerous stretch of year, the deepest part of winter, the part of the calendar where darkness wins more hours than daylight, where the world goes quiet, not because it's peaceful, no, but because it's conversing what little energy it has left. The air is sharper, breath turns visible, wood splits in the cold with the sound like bone, and the night feels crowded. In the modern world, winter is an inconvenience. A storm is a scheduled change. The cold is a problem we solve with heating and insulation and delivery apps. We talk about winter like it's a scenery. But for most of human history, winter was not a scenery. Winter was a predator. It killed with patience. It killed with distance. It killed without anger. No dramatic moment. No villain speech. Just small mistakes stacking up until the body quit. And that's why early winter traditions weren't just celebrations. They were survival rituals. Our ancestors didn't celebrate Christmas because they felt joy. They celebrated because they survived another year. And survival demands discipline. Discipline demands rules. And rules demand consequences. Long before police, before courts, before child psychology, before therapy, fear was a tool that kept communities alive. Fear kept children close to the fire. Fear kept people from wandering into the woods. Fear taught restraint when excess meant starvation later. Every winter culture developed something in the dark to enforce that fear. Some had spirits. Some had devils, some had riders in the sky, some had old women who counted your sins like beads. But in the Alpine regions of Europe, they had something else. They had something that didn't comfort you. It corrected you. So guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Tonight, we're talking about the embodiment of that fear, not a metaphor, not a cartoon villain, not a goofy holiday monster, a figure so effective his name still makes people uncomfortable centuries later. Tonight, we're talking about Krampus, the shadow behind Christmas, the punishment that followed the reward, the reminder that winter does not care if you are good. So dim the lights, pour up some hot chocolate, and buckle up, because tonight we're taking a long, cold ride down the highway of the hidden. And just so you know what kind of night this is going to be, we're not treating Krampus like a costume. We're treating him like a system. A system built out of hunger, out of darkness, out of discipline, out of cold law. Because the oldest truth about winter is this: it doesn't hate you, it doesn't love you, it simply waits to see what you do. Before Christmas was about gifts, it was about endurance. In medieval Europe and across northern regions, winter was the season where everything tightened: food, movement, emotion, hope. You didn't go out in winter the way you do now. You didn't casually wander. You didn't take long trips unless you had to. Roads vanished. Rivers became traps. A familiar path could disappear under snow and turn into a white, silent maze. And when you're living that way, when every candle matters, when every bite matters, behavior stops being a personality trait. Behavior becomes a life or death variable. That's why early Christmas traditions are so strict. Not because people hated joy, but because joy is expensive. A feast in winter is a flex against starvation. It's saying, we have enough money to eat today, and if you have enough to eat today, you still have to have enough to eat tomorrow. So communities built rules around restraint. Children weren't indulged, they were shaped. A disobedient child wasn't just a nuisance, they were a liability. If a child wastes food, that waste echoes. If a child wanders off, the whole household risks exposure searching for them. If a child brings sickness into a home already weakened by cold and hunger, it can spread fast. Winter doesn't forgive mistakes, so winter cultures taught fear early, not as a cruelty, as instruction. And if you think that sounds harsh, remember the alternative wasn't a timeout. The alternative was not making it to spring. So parents and elders leaned on stories, not soft bedtime stories, stories with teeth. Stories that made a child's stomach drop. Because when fear lives in your mind, it controls your feet and it keeps you from crossing boundaries. It keeps you from stepping into the woods alone. It keeps you from touching what isn't yours. And that's where Krampus enters. He wasn't introduced as a fantasy, he was introduced as a consequence. He was the sound of winter rules taking a shape you could picture, a face you could imagine, waiting beyond the last house where the light ends. Let's get into the physical reality of Krampus. Krampus was designed to be unforgettable. Across Alpine regions, villages separated by mountains, valleys, weather, and centuries, descriptions stay eerily consistent. That consistency matters. It suggests a shared psychological blueprint, a face built to hijack instinct. Krampus is tall, unnaturally tall. He is not shaped like a friendly animal, not like a deer, not like a goat you'd see in a field. He's shaped like something that you learn to stand up and never should have. His body is covered in coarse dark hair, not clean fur, matted hair. The kind that clumps when wet, the kind that smells like smoke and animal sweat and damp wood. And he doesn't move like a man. He hunches, he leans forward like he's always listening. His face is wrong, not fully animal, not fully human. Hollow cheeks, a flattened nose, a mouth that looks built for tearing rather than speaking. In elder depictions, the expression isn't rage, it's appetite. And that's scarier because rage is emotional. It burns out, makes mistakes. Appetite is calm. Appetite is patient. Appetite doesn't negotiate. The horns that he had, they're essential. In old European symbolism, horns weren't cute. They weren't for Halloween decorations. Horns meant dominance, authority, nature, death, the wild, the part of life that humans never fully control. A horned figure doesn't ask permission. A horned figure takes. And then there's the tongue. Long, wet, hanging heavy in early artwork. It's meant to disgust you, to trigger the deep part of your brain that says, this is not safe. You're not meant to admire Krampus. You're meant to recoil. And then come the tools. So, birch rods, bundled switches, birch used historically for correction, purification through pain. The idea wasn't to destroy, the idea was to teach, to leave memory on the skin. And yes, here's the darker truth. Krampus didn't invent corporal punishment. He was built out of it. He was a walking version of what already happened in homes and schools and communities. The chains later came, layered on by Christianity and later depictions. Chains say imprisonment, control, something dangerous, kept barely contained. But the sack never changed. But the sacks aren't symbolic. Sacks are practical. They're used to carry grain, carcasses, waste, and when winter was deadly, when illnesses spread and bodies had to be moved quietly, sacks were also used to remove what people couldn't afford to look at. So when folklore say Krampus takes children in the sack, it's not just a metaphor. It's the mind trying to process a brutal winter reality in a way that can be spoken aloud. Krampusnacht. Hope I didn't butcher that. I'm not up to par on my German, but here we go. Krampusnacht was not entertainment. That's the modern misunderstanding. When people today see footage, men in masks running through streets, drinking, shouting, rattling chains, it looks like a festival, something tourists film and then forget. Historically, it was closer to a controlled breach in the wall of security. So once a year, the rules bent. Men stopped being farmers and fathers and neighbors and become something older. The mask wasn't meant to disguise identity. It was meant to erase it. These masks weren't decorative. They were grotesque by design. Exaggerated noses, snarling mouths, hollow eyes, horns bolted directly into carved wood, horsehair glued in clumps, some masks so heavy your neck would ache from carrying the face. And once the mask went on, the behavior changed. Men screamed things they would never say without it. They chased people, especially women and children, not playfully, but relentlessly. Bells were sewn into belts so you could hear them coming like warning sirens. Chains dragged across cobblestones so the sound was unavoidable. Fear was the point, not cruelty for fun, ritualized terror. In a rigid rural world, emotion had nowhere to go. Winter locked people in rooms with hunger, grief, and frustration. People swallowed fear because survival demanded it. Krampusnacht let fear exist openly, not because fear is good, but because suppressed fear turns into rot, into violence, into madness. So they built a ritual where the monster could run through the town and then be put back away. It always happened at night. The monster belongs to darkness, to torchlight, to firelight, to snow reflecting moonlight like bone. In those conditions, the village doesn't look like a village. It looks like a place being invaded, and that visual is part of the ritual. You have to see the world break briefly to appreciate order returning. And this is where the modern mind flinches because it sounds wrong. But remember, they weren't playing with horror. They were trying to survive it. The next morning, order returned, and because chaos had been acknowledged, order felt stronger. That's why banning Krampusnacht never worked. You don't eliminate chaos by pretending it doesn't exist. You only make it sneakier. To understand Krampus, you have to stop thinking about Christmas, right? Christmas came later, long before churches, nativity scenes, or saints. Winter itself was sacred and terrifying. Pre-Christian Europe didn't treat winter like a season. They treated it like a realm, a time where spirits moved closer because the world went quiet, when the dead felt nearer because everything living moved slower. The veil was thin, the sky was heavy, and storms didn't feel like weather. They felt like something passing through. Krampus fit into what scholars call winter enforcement spirits, active forces, not evil for evil's sake, but forces that punish behaviors that threaten survival. In other words, mortality in winter cultures isn't emotional, it's logistical. Greed is immoral because it fractures the group. Disobedience is immoral because it leads to exposure, hunger, and death. Krampus enforces logistics. They say there's overlap here with the Wild Hunt, spectral riders and winter storms. The hunt wasn't just a spooky story, it was a cultural explanation for mass death events, people disappearing in storms, villages losing travelers, families freezing on roads. Folklore doesn't say hypothermia, folklore says the hunt road. Krampus may have belonged to that ecosystem, not a lone monster, a collector. Then Christianity arrives and struggles with the gray. The church prefers clean lines, good and evil, heaven and hell. Krampus punished wrongdoing, but he didn't offer salvation. He didn't tempt, he corrected. So the church did what it always does with what it can't recognize. It demonized it. Horns become proof of hellish origin, hooves become a sign of Satan, chains symbolize imprisonment, and the sack becomes a path to hell. But no matter how much theology was layered on the top, the core never changed. Krampus wasn't invented to scare children. He was invented to explain winter. Cold doesn't care if you're good. Darkness doesn't forgive mistakes. Nature doesn't negotiate. Krampus is winter with a face. Here's where the legend stops being symbolic. Most people are comfortable with Krampus as a metaphor, fear dressed up as folklore to scare children into behaving. But when you dig into older oral stories, especially those passed down quietly, something changes. The story doesn't end with discipline. They end with absence. Children who were present before Krampusnacht, gone afterwards. No footprints, no body recovered in spring, no explanation that satisfies. And yes, obviously, historians would offer rational possibilities, exposure, illness, wolves, accidents, violence, all that good stuff. But folklore doesn't survive on accuracy. It survives on pattern. And the pattern was this: bad children disappeared. That narrative becomes a survival mechanism because it's easier to believe a monster took your child than to accept that winter did. And it's easier to teach the living with a story than to paralyze the village with unbearable truth. So Krampus becomes a name for loss, a face for tragedy, a way to aim fear at behavior instead of letting fear dissolve into hopelessness. Parents didn't comfort children with soft lies, they armed them with fear, because fear kept them close to the fire. In a world like that, belief is not a game, belief is a fence. Institutions hate what they can't control. Krampus was uncontrollable. He existed in a place older than law, the village, the family, the winter rule book, written by hunger and death. Religious authorities didn't like him because he didn't fit. He punished without forgiveness. He didn't redeem. He didn't care about confession, and that's dangerous to systems built on managing guilt. So they labeled him demonic. They attempted bans, mass destroyed, festivals restricted, people punished for participation. Later, secular governments tried to, especially authoritarian regimes in the 20th century. Krampusnacht was called immoral, destabilizing, dangerous. And in a way, they weren't wrong, because Krampusnacht temporarily strips social order and lets fear run on legs. But Here's the lesson every institution learns too late. You cannot erase folklore. You can only drive it underground. And underground stories don't become weaker. They become meaner. They become private. They become personal. And that's how Krampus evolves from a public enforcer to a private threat. So why did Krampus come back? Krampus didn't disappear. He waited. Modern Christmas became sanitized. Safe, predictable, naughty or nice became a joke. Consequences became optional. But something was lost. Fear once had a job. Boundaries mattered. Actions had weight. Krampus returned because modern society removed the shadow. And when you remove the shadow, the light feels fake. His resurgence, festivals, masks, art, films, isn't random. It's backlash. A hunger for something older and harsher and more honest. Krampus reminds us warmth only matters because cold exists. Joy only matters because it ends. And winter does not care about your traditions. Krampus isn't here to ruin Christmas. He's here to remind you what Christmas survived. Krampus in America. Krampus didn't cross the Atlantic in a ship. He crossed in memory. Traditions. German and Austrian immigrants brought traditions with them quietly, behind closed doors, in language and warnings that didn't translate cleanly into English. Switches hung where children could see them, stories told in low voices. The American version didn't have tight villages enforcing shared ritual. America was wide, disconnected, sometimes lawless, and monsters behaved differently in open spaces. Without structure, folklore becomes ambiguous. So in parts of Pennsylvania, German country, and Midwest community, and pockets of Texas Hill country where German settlement history runs deep, winter discipline stories persisted, sometimes not called Krampus, but carrying the same shape, horn punishment, sack threats, winter enforcers. Then the blending begins. Appalachian winter haints, frontier paranoia, isolation myths, religious dread. The result is that Krampus in America becomes less like a parade and more like a presence. People don't say, I saw Krampus. They say, something tall stood in the doorway. It smelled like smoke and wet animal. I couldn't move. It didn't attack, just watched. It felt like judgment. That's important. Not chase, not violence, evaluation. And that turns Krampus into something modern audiences fear in a different way. Not because he'll kill you, but because he will measure you. And people don't like being measured in the dark. So let's get into some of the darker facts. Birch rods weren't symbolic. They were real discipline tools. Sacks weren't poetic. They were used for transport, grain, carcasses, waste, and in hard winters and epidemics, sometimes bodies were removed quietly to keep panic down. Krampusnacht has historically been associated with injuries, falls, fights, cuts, hypothermia, accidents, because anonymity plus alcohol plus darkness equals danger. Masks do something to the human brain. They let people become what they already are without consequences. And that's the blunt truth. And here's one of the hardest parts. Historically, women were not always safe during these nights. Terror were directed strategically, chasing, cornering, humiliation. Modern events sanitize this, but older culture patterns show that winter enforcement rituals often contain social domination, and that's not comfortable, but it's real. And Krampus belongs to the real winter world, not the Hallmark one. Krampus doesn't ask if you're good, he asks if you're sustainable, because winter cultures judged you by what kept the group alive. Waste, greed, recklessness, excess. Those aren't bad morals, those are death habits. So what Krampus actually is, Krampus is not a demon in the movie sense. He's a consequence with a face. He is the part of winter that corrects behavior. That's why you can't kill him, because you can't kill the rule. You can only ignore it. And ignoring winter rules have always ended in the same way, quietly, coldly, without drama. Krampus survives because the conditions that made him never truly left. We just insulated ourselves long enough to forget. So, with all that being said, Christmas survived because people respected winter, not because they defeated it. They prepared, they feared, they disciplined themselves. Krampus wasn't meant to be loved. He was meant to be remembered, because forgetting winter is how winter kills you. So when the lights glow and the music plays and the season promises forgiveness without effort, remember, the shadow never left. It only waits until you pretend it isn't there. This has been Highway of the Hidden. I'm your host, Polar Bear. If you got stories, sightings, experiences, and you want to be on the show, this is how you reach me. You can reach out to me at polarbearhoth@gmail.com. You can hit me up on TikTok, Instagram, polarbearhoth, Facebook, Highway of the Hidden. Until next time, people, buckle up and stay safe out there in the dark. And once again, Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope y'all really, truly enjoy it and have a Happy New Year.
And as the road disappears into the mist, the hidden waits for those brave enough to follow. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows and remember, every highway has its secrets. This has been Highway of the Hidden.